If you don't answer messages right away, people already think something is wrong with you, but what if the opposite is true? If you've ever opened a message, read it carefully, understood exactly what the other person meant, and still felt something inside you hesitate before replying, not because you wanted to ignore them, not because you didn't care, but because you didn't feel ready to answer in that exact moment, then you've probably already experienced something most people completely misunderstand about you. Because from the outside it looks simple, it looks like a choice, it looks like delay, but internally it is something much more complex that very few people ever take the time to understand. The world we live in today has created an unspoken rule that has quietly shaped how people judge each other, and that rule is extremely simple. If you care, you respond quickly, and if you don't respond, then you must not care, and this idea has become so normalized that nobody questions it anymore, even though it ignores one very important truth about human psychology, which is that not all minds process interaction at the same speed or in the same way. Because for some people, a message is not just a message, it is not just a few words on a screen that require a quick answer, it becomes something that immediately activates multiple layers of thinking at once, where the brain begins to analyze tone, meaning, intention, possible interpretations, emotional consequences, and even future reactions, turning what should be a simple reply into something that feels unexpectedly heavy and mentally demanding. And this is where the difference begins to show, because while most people operate on fast communication, sending replies almost automatically without much thought, there are others who cannot do that, not because they lack social skills or interest, but because their mind refuses to respond on a superficial level, and instead tries to process the interaction more deeply before engaging. This is often mistaken as distance, but in reality, it is depth. You are not ignoring the message, you are thinking about it in a way that most people don't, and that thinking creates a pause, and that pause creates delay, and that delay creates misunderstanding, because people on the outside can only see your silence, not the mental activity happening behind it. There is also an emotional layer that most people never consider, which is that every interaction requires a certain amount of energy, and for someone whose mind is already occupied, already processing multiple things, already carrying internal thoughts that are not visible to others, even a small conversation can feel like an additional weight that needs to be handled properly. So instead of reacting immediately, your brain chooses to wait, not because it wants to disconnect, but because it wants to respond in a way that feels right, in a way that feels authentic, in a way that does not create more confusion or emotional noise. But in a fast-paced world where speed is rewarded and silence is often misinterpreted, this natural tendency starts to become a source of self-doubt, because you begin to compare yourself to others who seem to reply effortlessly, who don't hesitate, who don't overthink, and you start asking yourself why something so simple feels complicated for you. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to see your own way of processing as a weakness, even though it is actually a reflection of a more complex and more selective cognitive style that prioritizes meaning over speed. Because the truth is, people who don't answer messages right away are often not careless or rude, they are selective in how they engage, they are aware of the weight of communication, and they understand that words are not just words, but actions that can affect how others feel, how situations evolve, and how relationships develop over time. This is why they don't rush. They don't send empty replies just to fill silence, they don't respond just to appear present, and they don't engage unless they feel mentally ready to do so, and this creates a pattern that is often misunderstood but deeply rooted in how their mind works. However, there is also a balance that needs to be recognized, because the same pause that protects your energy can also slowly turn into avoidance if it is not understood, where messages are delayed not because of thoughtful processing, but because they start to feel overwhelming, and that is when difference begins to shift into disconnection. And that is why awareness becomes important, because once you understand that your delay is not a flaw but a pattern, you gain control over it, you stop judging yourself for it, and you begin to decide consciously when to respond and how much energy to give, because your silence is not emptiness, it is processing, your delay is not disrespect, it is consideration, and your difference is not something that needs to be fixed, but something that needs to be understood. So the next time you open a message and feel that familiar hesitation before replying, don't immediately assume that something is wrong with you, instead take a moment to recognize what is actually happening, because what looks like a simple delay from the outside is often a sign of a mind that operates differently, more carefully, and more deeply than most people will ever realize.